Hello and welcome to Illuminated. This is a space for us to talk about books, not only how they connect us to ourselves, but how they connect us to the world around us. And today we are going to be looking at Maggie Smith's You Could Make This Place Beautiful. And this is often a book that I teach, as it's a memoir that helps writers see ways that they can tell their story, to look at the methodology and how Smith created this. But also it is really accessible and allows us to dive right in and to join Smith in her journey. And so I am going to start right at the prologue, because it's in the very first sentence that she sets this whole book up and informs the reader about what's going on. So, first sentence. Before we go any further together, me with my lanterns and you following close behind, lights flickering on both our faces, I want to be clear about something. This isn't a tell-all. She continues. A tell-all would need an omniscient narrator, godlike, hovering over the whole scene, seeing into houses, listening to conversations and phone calls, reading texts and emails. And then she continues on. But that first sentence, she's telling us this isn't a tell-all. You're not getting my whole story here. She also tells us that she's the writer, me with my lanterns, that she's taking the lead on this journey, but then we're following close behind. So it really is this journey that we're taking together. And so in some way she's already setting up that it's not all figured out. She's out there with lanterns, searching and looking and trying to understand. And we are right behind her in that process. And so we get that indication that it's a journey. We're embarking on this journey with her, and we're not getting everything. She pretty much sets that all up in the very beginning, first sentence. And so there's a title progression that goes on in the beginning, and it goes prologue, pine cone, postcard, grenade. We get this set up quickly, and the book unfolds and loops in this way the rest of the story. So Maggie Smith uses a range of forms in this book. However, while like the nonfiction essay can be a micro essay, it can be a hermit crab, it could be a braided essay, I see that Smith has taken the form into a more braided narrative, expanding outside of that essay structure and using it as the form for this book, her tell mine. And so she creates this braided narrative throughout the book. The book itself becomes that. And when I was reading this recently for the second time, I really felt this really meditative state in the cadence and how she moves us through this, looping and returning, so that she's helping us come to terms with what's happening by taking us on this journey and braiding it through. So throughout, she has chapter titles that will braid throughout the whole book. One is How I Picture It. Another one, Some People Ask. And then she does a note on, and usually a note on some literary term, like a note on foreshadowing, a note on narrator. And that's, so this changes, but the heart of that title is a note on literary device. There's the play. And then there's also A Friend Says Every Book Begins with an Unanswerable Question. So those chapter titles continue throughout the book, and that also helps us get into this real meditative state, like, oh, we're now into that, like How I Picture It. We're now into the play. We're back into a note on. We're back into A Friend Says, right? So you just move through there. However, she gives other spaces where there's repeatable titles. They don't have that same looping throughout the whole book, but they're throughout, and they give little bursts of ahas, or now we're back into this space. And those titles are Bittersweet, The Material, Pinecone, or Grenade. Those get used interchangeably. There's also On Second Thought, About the Body, Ghost Story, Postcard, which again was one of the first ones, Magical Thinking, and An Offering. So those kind of weave through as well. And I think that way of allowing us to get grounding through the titles, through the methodology, through how each of those chapters do something specific, and that helps you kind of stay in the moment, is really good because we are on this journey with her. Like I said at the beginning, she says, I'm out there with lanterns, you're following close behind, and we are just on that braided journey alongside her in that case. And in the towards the end, in the materials, a chapter of materials, she says, the way I'm telling you this story, these pieces, these strands, these echoes, is the story. And I think that is exactly what I'm talking about. She understands that these chapters are strands that she's braided together. Some of them are looped over top of the braids, some are woven in between, but that she's bringing all these strands together. It's not this full linear narrative. And I would say that as a whole with the book, it's not linear. It's not like, okay, this happened and then here's the rest of the story. So we get that at the very beginning. As I mentioned, we start off with the very powerful prologue pine code postcard grenade. And you'll understand what that's all about when you get into the book and you start reading that. And that is very like next step, next step, next step, next step. And then we move into a life, a journey through that life, a journey through her understanding of what has happened and how that has changed things. And then also how she is changing and growing and becoming throughout the rest. But we continually kind of have these moments back and forth through time. And I think that's also part of it. And in this, when she was using one of those devices, like a note on foreshadowing, she mentions that it's a mistake to think of life as a plot. That it doesn't just have that same progression like a book would have. It's not fiction. It is real life. And it doesn't move from point A to B. And then resolution at the end, it's a journey and we're always moving through that. And she kind of talks about that throughout. At one point in one of the sections called the postcard, she mentions, quote, I can't show you because I can't see it or hear it myself. But while we're on the subject, why would you want to be in the room with us? And this is a beautiful way throughout the book that Maggie Smith allows to set up her own boundaries. And she will tell the reader, you don't need to be here. Why are you even thinking you need to be here in this conversation? And one of those ones, she's talking about having to inform her children about the divorce. And she's like, what kind of person would want to be there and listen to that? No, it's not for you. And that's one of the things I really loved about what she did in this space. And it's often something I talk to writers about, that you can set up that boundary. You can say, this isn't for you, or this isn't my story to tell, or I understand you really want to know X about what's happening, but I'm not telling you. And there was something really refreshing in the way that she did this, to say, I recognize you want to know this, but I'm not telling it to you. Whether I don't have access to it, in this one where she was saying, I can't show you because I can't see it or hear it myself, or it's not her story to tell. And I think that's it has helped writers that I have worked with to have the permission to do the same, to set those boundaries. Because often when you're working with editors or agents, they're like, I want to know more. I want to know about this. I want to know about that. I mean, even beta readers are asking for stuff like that. And as a writer, you've already made a decision that you don't want to do that. However, sometimes those questions are good and we need to push into things, but sometimes it is a boundary that we have set for a reason. It's not something we want to tell. So I love the way that she handles that throughout, and she allows for that space to say, you're not getting this information. I recognize you want this information, but you're not getting it. And another thing that I love that she did is really how she addresses the reader throughout. Like in that, she's like, I'm not telling you this. There's another time she asks this of the reader. She says, You might want to dog ear this detail in your mind so you can come back to it later. And then later in the book, she does return to it. She's like, remember that time I told you to dog ear it? Here we are. And again, that idea of she's with lanterns, we're following behind. She's like, hey, this is important. Remember this. We're going to come back to it later. And then she actually takes us there. And it's really so impactful the way that she invites the reader in the journey, in the narrative. She makes these points, these cues to say, here you are, reader. You are alongside me in this. You're in this space with me, and we're traveling on this together. One of the things that I often point out when I'm teaching this book or when I'm working with writers and memoir writers as they're working on their own memoirs, and we might be using this as a tool to help them get to the end or see how form can work or see how another writer did it, is in one of her other chapters, the material. And she says, the question I keep asking myself as I write this book, the question I keep insisting upon is this: how can this story, this experience be useful to anyone other than me? How can I make this material into a tool you can use? And then she says, I talk back to myself, experience is instructive, people make connections on their own. And this is what I've been talking about in the podcast. You don't have to have had the experience that Maggie Smith had to connect to the story, to connect with the way she tells the story. There are things in there that you will connect to that will reflect back to you, that will be a mirror for you, that you will say, oh, aha, I see that about myself. It also helps you to connect to people around you, connect to the wider world. But I love that she has used this book to essentially say, in all honesty, as a writer, especially in memoir, why am I doing this? Who's going to read this? How could this possibly help somebody? How is this not just me like working through my story? And the thing is, it's that connection. It's the way people will connect with the narrative. They will come to it with who they are, and they will find connection, whatever that may be. And I think this is another space that provides that permission to say your story is important. It makes a difference. And if you're sharing it, people will connect to it. The people that need to find it will find it, and they will connect to it. This is your artwork. This is your creative space to take into the world your story. And I just love that. I love that whole section where she's really talking about that, and she's really being honest. Towards the end of the book, she states, I'm handing you a stack of Polaroids to shuffle in your hands, so some of the work is yours. And once again, I thought this was a really beautiful way of saying, this isn't just me telling you my story and you get to sit back and it's entertainment. This is not just for you to read and absorb. It is for you to participate. It is for you to be part of this. And I'm giving you all these pieces. It's your job to figure out how the weave works, how the braiding's working, for you to really kind of come in, not only to understand my story, but to understand yourself. Again, so much of what I talk about in this podcast, it is not just entertainment. These are mirrors and reflections back to us. It is also a way for us to connect to others, to become part of the conversation and not to be on your own. You are joining in the conversation. So I love that so much. So I'm going to end today's podcast a little bit different than what I normally do. So when I'm teaching this book, oftentimes we go through all the things we've been talking about, a lot more in depth, but I always have writing prompts throughout, as it's usually a generative workshop as well. And so I'm going to offer that to you. If you are a writer, or if you're not a writer, this is a fun exercise. So there is a scene in here where she goes and looks at her house on Google Maps, and it's from the past, like when it was last taken. She was still married and there was still things going on and her kids were little and this whole thing. And so she like writes the narrative of the past by looking at the Google Maps of the place. And then I think later on she goes again and it's changed. And so she looks at, okay, so now it's changed. And so I thought this is a really fun exercise. So basically, go look at Google Maps on whether it's your own house, where you grew up, a place that you love, and look at it. Go look at the map. Go look at the place on the map, and then kind of write the scene of, the house, the place from Google Earth, and when was the picture taken? What has changed? What has remained the same? What might you or others have been doing at the moment it was captured? As just an exercise to investigate place, our story, and it's like a really tangible thing that you can go look up and go, oh, I remember that, or oh, look, my garden looks totally different, or oh, there was a tree in the yard at the time, or whatever. What has changed? What has remained the same? What actions were taking place? And just use that as an exercise to write today, to connect into your place and your story. Because as always, and I will say it again and again, your story matters. It helps us connect to you. It helps us connect to the world around us. And we will continue to grow and learn as we continue to read. So thank you for joining me here today. Again, we were looking at Maggie Smith's You Could Make This Place Beautiful, a memoir that is just gorgeous, honest, accessible, and is really good tool for other memoir writers to investigate how someone tells their story. Thanks again. Wishing you a wonderful day.